Ex-wife caught in a web of secrets after meeting ex-husband. What did he reveal that changed everything? Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main characters. Sarah had always been a woman of structure. She lived her life by routine and predictability, and after her divorce from Jack, she thought she had a firm grasp on what her future would look like. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It had been years since she had seen Jack, but when he reached out to her, asking for a meeting, she couldn't help but feel a sense of nervous excitement. What could he want? Why now? Jack had always been unpredictable, and their marriage had ended in such a way that left Sarah with unanswered questions. They met at a quiet cafe in the corner of town. The kind of place that had been a favorite of theirs during their brief time together. It was almost as though Jack had chosen it on purpose to remind her of the past. As Sarah sat down across from him, she couldn't help but notice how much he had changed. His once youthful face now showed the marks of time, yet his eyes still carried that same intensity that had captivated her all those years ago. The air between them was thick with tension, each of them unsure of what to say or how to break the silence. Finally, Jack spoke, his voice low and steady. I know it's been a while, Sarah. But there are things we need to discuss. Things I never told you before. Sarah raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. She had spent years wondering about the secrets Jack had kept from her. But to hear him admit that there were things he hadn't shared? That made her uneasy. What are you talking about, Jack? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though she could feel the adrenaline rushing through her veins. Jack leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting to the window for a moment, before turning back to her. There are things about our marriage, Sarah. Things I never wanted to burden you with. But now it's time you knew the truth. Sarah's heart raced. Could it be? Could Jack finally be ready to open up about the things that had been left unsaid for so long? The things she had always suspected but never had the courage to confront. She braced herself for whatever revelation was about to come. But nothing could have prepared her for the words Jack spoke next. Sarah felt the weight of Jack's words hang in the air, like a thick fog that refused to lift. Her heart beat faster, a mix of dread and anticipation coursing through her veins. She leaned forward, trying to focus, trying to decipher what Jack was about to say. The years of silence between them had left her with 1,000 questions, and now, finally, it seemed like she might get some answers. Jack's eyes were steady, but there was something in them, something unfamiliar, that unsettled her. It wasn't just the guilt she had come to expect from their past, it was something deeper, more urgent. He wasn't just talking about their failed marriage. No, this was bigger. She could feel it. Sarah, Jack said slowly, as if weighing each word before it left his mouth. There was something I never told you. Something that I should have. Something that changes everything. She swallowed hard. What is it, Jack? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, unsure if she was ready for whatever truth he was about to spill. Jack hesitated, as though he were deciding whether to take the plunge. Finally he spoke, his voice barely audible, but heavy with conviction. It wasn't just me, Sarah. It wasn't just my faults, or my mistakes. There was someone else involved. Someone who played a bigger part in our divorce than you ever knew. Sarah's stomach tightened, a knot of confusion and fear slowly forming. What are you saying? She demanded, her voice steadier now, though she could feel her heart racing. Jack leaned forward, the weight of his revelation pressing down on them both. I'm telling you that our divorce wasn't just because we couldn't make it work. It was because I was forced into it. Someone else made sure it happened. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Sarah's mind spun. Who could Jack be talking about? She thought she knew everything there was to know about their divorce. It had been messy, yes, but she never suspected there was more to it than that. Who? She whispered, the question tumbling out before she could stop it. Jack met her gaze, his eyes dark with a mixture of guilt and something else, something that made Sarah's skin crawl. It was your mother, Sarah. The words hit her like a slap to the face. Her mind couldn't process them fast enough. Her mother? The woman who had always supported her, who had encouraged her through the hardest moments of her life. It didn't make sense. No. No, you're lying, Sarah said, shaking her head in disbelief. My mother had nothing to do with this. She would never do that. Jack's voice was quiet but firm. She did, Sarah. She's the one who pushed for the divorce. She's the one who made sure it happened. Sarah felt like the ground was slipping out from under her. Her mother, the one person she thought she could always trust, had been behind the destruction of her marriage? It was too much to bear. You're wrong, Sarah said, her voice breaking. You have to be wrong. Jack's face softened with a sad, almost sympathetic expression. I wish I were wrong, Sarah. But I'm not. She had her reasons, and she made sure it happened. I never wanted to hurt you. But you deserve to know the truth. Sarah sat back in her chair, her mind reeling. The cafe around her seemed to blur, the noise of other patrons fading into the background. All she could hear was the rush of blood in her ears, the sound of her own heartbeat as it thudded loudly in her chest. Her mother. It didn't make sense. Why would she do something like this? And why hadn't Jack told her sooner? She felt betrayed, confused, and utterly lost. Why didn't you tell me this before? She finally managed to ask, her voice barely audible. Jack exhaled deeply, his gaze softening as if he understood the weight of her words. I didn't want to hurt you more than I already had. But now, with everything that's happened, you deserve to know the truth. Sarah could feel the tears welling up in her eyes. She had spent so long wondering what went wrong, blaming herself, blaming Jack. But now, everything was upside down. Her world had just been shattered. And she wasn't sure if she could ever put it back together. Sarah's mind was racing, each new revelation swirling around her, making it hard to breathe. She had always believed that her mother was a source of unwavering support, a constant figure in her life. How could she have been the one behind the breakdown of her marriage? The thought was unbearable. She shook her head, trying to make sense of it, but nothing seemed to fit. The world around her felt distant, like she was trapped in a fog, unable to see clearly. Jack watched her, his expression unreadable, but there was a trace of sympathy in his eyes. He could see the struggle inside her, the turmoil that was eating away at her. Sarah, he said softly, I know this is hard to process. But I didn't want to keep this from you forever. You deserve to know the truth. She looked at him, her heart heavy with confusion and hurt. But why? She asked, her voice trembling. Why would my mother do something like this? What could she possibly gain from destroying my marriage? Jack leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant as if he were searching for the right words. I can't speak for your mother, Sarah. I can't explain why she did what she did. All I can tell you is that she was determined. She thought she was doing what was best for you, but she couldn't see the bigger picture. And because of that, things got out of control. Sarah's mind was reeling. Her mother, the woman who had always told her that she deserved to be happy, had played a part in taking that happiness away. The weight of the truth pressed down on her chest, suffocating her. She couldn't breathe. No, Sarah whispered, more to herself than to Jack. This doesn't make sense. My mother, she would never. Jack's voice interrupted her, firm but gentle. Sarah, I wish it wasn't true. I wish I could take this back, but I can't. What happened between us, what happened in your marriage, was influenced by things neither of us could control. And I'm sorry you had to be caught. In the middle of it, Sarah felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. Her mind was in a haze, unable to process everything at once. But why didn't you tell me sooner? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling over him. I didn't want to hurt you, Sarah. I didn't want to add to the pain you were already feeling. But now now it's time for you to know the truth. You deserve that much. Sarah sat in stunned silence, the silence between them stretching longer than either of them could bear. She had always thought she understood her life, her choices, her relationships. But now, it felt like everything she had known was built on lies. The very foundation of her past was crumbling beneath her, and she didn't know how to stop it. She thought she knew the reasons for her failed marriage, the mistakes they had both made, but this new truth was something she had never expected. The betrayal wasn't just from Jack, it was from her own flesh and blood. I need to think, Sarah whispered, standing up slowly, her knees weak beneath her. Jack nodded, his eyes filled with regret, but he didn't stop her. He understood that she needed space to process the impossible truth he had just revealed. As Sarah walked away from the cafe, her mind was numb, her heart shattered. She didn't know what to believe anymore, and she wasn't sure if she ever would again. Sarah spent the next few days in a daze, replaying the conversation with Jack over and over in her mind. She couldn't shake the image of his face when he had told her the truth. It had been hard to believe, and yet deep down, there was a part of her that couldn't ignore the possibility. She had always trusted her mother, but now, she felt like everything she had known about her life was a lie. The woman who had always been her rock, her support system, had been the one to pull the strings behind the scenes, orchestrating the end of her marriage. It felt like betrayal on a level she couldn't comprehend. She tried to reach out to her mother, to confront her about the accusations, but each time she picked up the phone, her hands trembled. She was terrified of what the truth would be, terrified of how her mother would react. What if it was all true? What if her mother really had been the one to push for the divorce? Could she ever look at her the same way again? As the days passed, Sarah became more and more withdrawn. She avoided talking to her friends, her family, and even Jack. She didn't know how to process everything. She didn't know how to move forward when it felt like her world had come crashing down. The guilt weighed heavily on her, as if she was somehow responsible for what had happened. She couldn't shake the feeling that maybe she had missed something, that she should have seen the signs before it was too late. But no matter how much she thought about it, she couldn't change the past. One evening, after several sleepless nights, Sarah finally decided to confront her mother. She couldn't go on living in this limbo, not knowing the truth. She needed answers, and she needed them now. She arrived at her mother's house just as the sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the quiet neighborhood. It was a scene that should have been comforting, but tonight, everything felt off. As she knocked on the door, her heart raced, and she felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. When her mother answered, her face lit up with the familiar warmth Sarah had always known. But today, it felt like a mask, hiding something deeper. "Sarah, darling! It's so good to see you," her mother said, pulling her into a hug. Sarah didn't return the embrace. She stepped back, her expression hardening. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. Her mother looked confused for a moment before her face softened with concern. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" Sarah took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Jack told me everything. About the divorce, about what you did." Her mother's face went pale, and for a moment, Sarah thought she saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it came. "What are you talking about?" her mother asked, her voice shaking. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," Sarah replied, her voice cold. "Jack said you were the one who pushed for the divorce. That you were the one who made sure it happened." Her mother's expression faltered for a moment, then hardened. "I don't know what Jack has been telling you, but he's lying. He's been lying to you from the start." Sarah felt a pang of frustration. She had hoped for the truth, but now, it seemed like she was getting more of the same. "I'm not lying, Mom," she said, her voice rising. "Jack wouldn't say something like that if it wasn't true. I need to know why. Why would you do this to me? To us?" Her mother stared at her for a long moment, her face unreadable. Finally she sighed, as if resigning herself to something. "You wouldn't understand. she said softly, her voice distant. I did what I thought was best for you. You didn't see the things I saw, the things I had to protect you from. Sarah's mind was racing. What things? What could be so bad that you had to destroy my marriage? Her mother shook her head, looking away. I can't explain it all right now, Sarah. But trust me, I did it because I thought it was for the best. Sometimes, we do things to protect the ones we love, even if they don't understand it at the time. Sarah felt her blood run cold. This wasn't the answer she had been hoping for. It was an excuse, a feeble attempt to justify the unforgivable. She stood there, feeling the weight of the conversation pressing down on her, and she realized that she might never fully understand her mother's actions. But one thing was clear, nothing would ever be the same between them again. Sarah left her mother's house feeling more lost than ever before. The conversation had done nothing to clear up the confusion, only adding to it. Her mother's vague explanations and refusal to fully confront what had happened only made Sarah feel more isolated. She had come seeking answers, but instead, she had walked away with more questions. The world she had known was crumbling around her, and there was no one to turn to. Her mind kept racing, replaying everything Jack had said, everything her mother had denied. She couldn't understand why her mother had done what she had, why she had chosen to tear apart Sarah's life in such a way. All the years of support, all the times her mother had promised to always be there for her, suddenly seemed like a facade. The betrayal ran deep, and it was hard for Sarah to even look at her mother the same way. She couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the story. Maybe there was something she was missing, something that could help her make sense of everything. But the more she thought about it, the more frustrated she became. She needed answers, real answers. She needed to know why her mother had taken such drastic steps to destroy her marriage. She couldn't accept that her mother had acted out of some misguided sense of protection. No, there had to be more to it than that. As the days passed, Sarah found herself withdrawing further from those around her. Her friends tried to reach out, but she kept them at arm's length, too consumed by the turmoil inside her to focus on anything else. The pain of betrayal was all-encompassing, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape it. She thought about confronting Jack again, to see if there was something more he could tell her. But a part of her didn't want to hear any more painful truths. She had heard enough. The weight of everything was becoming unbearable. One evening, after another sleepless night, Sarah decided to take a walk to clear her mind. She didn't know where she was going, but she needed to get out of the house, away from the four walls that seemed to close in on her. As she walked through the quiet streets, her thoughts remained fixated on her mother. She wondered if her mom had any regrets, if she ever truly understood the damage she had caused. Sarah could still feel the sting of her mother's words, the way she had dismissed her feelings, as though the pain Sarah was experiencing didn't matter. It wasn't just the divorce that hurt. It was the betrayal, the realization that the one person she had trusted most had played a key role in her heartbreak. Sarah felt a cold wave of anger wash over her. She had always prided herself on being strong, on being able to handle whatever life threw at her. But this was different. This was a betrayal she couldn't fix. As she continued walking, lost in her thoughts, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, half expecting it to be one of her friends trying to check on her, but instead, it was Jack. He looked as lost as she felt, his face drawn with worry. "Sarah," he said softly, taking a step toward her. "We need to talk." Sarah froze, her heart skipping a beat. She wasn't sure if she was ready for another conversation with him, but she knew that something had to change. She couldn't keep carrying this weight on her own. "What is it, Jack?" she asked, her voice flat. He hesitated, then spoke, his words slow and careful. "I know you're angry, and I don't blame you. But there's more I need to tell you. More than you're ready to hear." Sarah didn't know whether to walk away or listen, but she knew that if she didn't hear him out now, she might never get the chance. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. "I'm listening." Jack looked at her with a mix of regret and determination. "The truth about what happened between us, it's not just about your mother. There are things that I haven't been able to tell you, things that I never wanted to say. But now, I think you deserve to know the full story." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. Was this it? Was this the answer she had been searching for? She felt a surge of emotion rise within her, a mix of fear and hope. Could this finally be the moment when everything made sense? Sarah stood still, her breath shallow as she waited for Jack to continue. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, and her heart was pounding in her chest. She had been so sure that she knew everything, that she had already heard the worst of it. But now, with Jack standing in front of her, there was something in his eyes, something that told her this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Jack sighed, looking as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He opened his mouth as if to speak but then closed it again, clearly unsure of where to start. Finally, he found his voice. "I should have told you this sooner, Sarah. I know that now, and I'm sorry for not being honest with you from the beginning. But the truth is, there was a lot more going on than just what you've been told. There were things I couldn't control, things that were happening behind the scenes, things I never imagined would come to this." Sarah's mind was racing. What more could there possibly be? Hadn't Jack already told her everything? Hadn't her mother already said enough to make her feel as if her entire world was falling apart? "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Jack took a step closer, his eyes not leaving hers. "There's more to your mother's involvement than you know. I wasn't the only one caught in this mess. There were other people, other forces at play, and it wasn't just about us. It was about something much bigger." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Bigger? What do you mean by that? Jack hesitated, looking down at the ground for a moment, as if searching for the right words. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost haunted. "Your mother, she wasn't the only one who had her reasons for what happened between us. There were people who were pulling the strings, people who knew more than they should have. I couldn't protect you from that, Sarah. I couldn't stop it." The words felt like a punch to her gut. Who could have been involved? And why hadn't Jack told her about them before? "Who are you talking about?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack swallowed hard, his face filled with regret. "I can't tell you everything, Sarah. Some of it is too dangerous for you to know, but what I can tell you is this. There are people who knew things they shouldn't have, people who took advantage of the situation. I was too blind to see it at the time, but now I understand. I should have never let it get this far." Sarah's mind was reeling. Everything she thought she knew was starting to slip away, replaced by this new, frightening reality. Who were these people Jack was talking about? What did they want, and why had they targeted her family? She felt lost, like she was trapped in a web of lies, with no way out. "So, you're saying this wasn't just about me and you?" she asked, her voice shaky. Jack nodded slowly. "No. It was bigger than that. It was never just about us, Sarah. There were things going on behind the scenes, things we couldn't control." He paused, looking at her with a mixture of sadness and regret. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I wish I could have done more, but I didn't know how to stop it. And I didn't want to hurt you even more than I already had." Sarah stood there, feeling numb. It wasn't just the divorce, it wasn't just the betrayal. It was everything, all of it, swirling around her. She didn't know who to trust anymore, didn't know who was really on her side. She had always thought she understood the world around her, but now it seemed like everything she thought she knew was false. She didn't know what to do with this new information, didn't know how to process it. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions, each one more urgent than the last. "So what now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jack looked at her, his eyes full of regret. "Now we face it. Together. I'll help you, Sarah. I won't leave you to face this alone." But Sarah wasn't so sure. She wasn't sure if she could trust him anymore. And she wasn't sure if there was anyone left who could be trusted. Sarah walked away from Jack, her heart heavy with the weight of everything she had just learned. She couldn't shake the image of his face when he had told her about the bigger forces at play, the people pulling the strings behind the scenes. It was a truth she wasn't ready for, but now it seemed impossible to ignore. As much as she wanted to believe Jack, to trust that he had been trying to protect her, the doubts were creeping in. If there were other people involved, if there were hidden motives she couldn't see, how could she ever trust anyone again? She walked down the quiet street, the cool night air doing little to clear her mind. Her thoughts were a blur, swirling with confusion and disbelief. What had been her life just a week ago now felt like a distant memory, like she was living in someone else's story. And the worst part was, she didn't know what to do next. She couldn't turn to her mother, not after everything that had been revealed. She couldn't turn to her friends who had no idea what she was going through. And Jack, well, he was the one who had just added more layers of complication to her already fractured world. What did he mean by bigger forces? What was she supposed to do with that information? The thought made her feel small, powerless. She had always been someone who took control of her life, who faced problems head-on. But now, it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. She didn't know how to fix any of this, or if it was even possible to fix. She arrived at her apartment, but the comfort she usually found in the familiar surroundings was gone. The space felt cold, empty, like it no longer belonged to her. She dropped her keys on the kitchen counter and walked into the living room, sinking into the couch. Her mind was racing again, replaying everything she had learned in the past few days. She thought about her mother's refusal to admit anything, the way she had tried to justify her actions. "I did it for you," her mother had said, but Sarah couldn't understand how any of this was for her. The lies, the betrayal, it was all too much. She stared at the wall in front of her, trying to steady her breath, trying to make sense of it all. But the more she thought about it, the more the pieces didn't fit. There had to be something more. Sarah needed answers, but not just from Jack. She needed to confront the people who had been involved, the ones who had caused all this damage. But where could she even start? How could she uncover the truth when everyone seemed to be hiding something? A sudden knock at the door startled her, and she jumped to her feet. She wasn't expecting anyone. Hesitantly, she walked to the door and peered through the peephole. It was Jack again. For a moment, she hesitated. Was she ready to hear more? Could she handle more of the truth, more of the secrets that had been kept from her for so long? Slowly, she opened the door, and Jack stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "I know this is hard, Sarah," he said, his voice softer than before. "But we need to figure this out. You can't keep running from the truth. We need to take control of this. Together." Sarah didn't know if she could believe him. She didn't know if she could trust him anymore. But she also knew that if she didn't confront this now, it would only eat away at her. "Fine," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "But I need to know everything, Jack. I need to understand what's really going on." Jack nodded, his expression serious. "You will. I'll tell you everything. But we need to be careful. There's more at stake than you realize." Sarah took a deep breath, bracing herself for whatever was coming next. She didn't know if she was ready for the truth, but there was no turning back now. She had to know. She just hoped that when it was all over, she would be able to piece together the broken fragments of her life. Sarah stood in the living room, feeling the weight of Jack's presence in her apartment. He had come in without waiting for her to say a word, as though he were determined to break through the wall of silence she had built around herself. She watched him closely, unsure whether she was ready for what he had to say next. But there was something in his eyes, a desperation, a need to make things right, that made her believe he wasn't going to leave until he told her everything. "I'm listening," she said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet resolve. Jack took a deep breath, the tension in his posture evident. "Sarah, I know this is hard, but you need to understand that your mother wasn't acting alone. There were others involved. I didn't want to drag you into this, but I can't protect you from the truth anymore." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The more Jack spoke, the more it felt like she was being pulled into a web of secrets she had no control over. Who are these people, Jack? Why didn't you tell me before? Jack looked around the room for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. Then he locked eyes with her, his expression darkening. There's a group of people who had their own reasons for wanting to destroy our marriage. Your mother was involved, yes, but so were others. Powerful people who have the ability to control outcomes, to manipulate situations for their own gain. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She had known there were things she didn't understand, but this was something else entirely. What do you mean, manipulate? What do they want? She asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and confusion. Jack ran a hand through his hair, frustration clearly building in him. It's not just about us, Sarah. This goes much deeper than you realize. These people, they knew about the cracks in our marriage, and they used it to their advantage. They made sure we couldn't stay together. They wanted you to be alone, isolated. It's all part of something bigger. Bigger? What could be bigger than all this? Sarah's head was spinning. She couldn't grasp the full scope of what Jack was saying. How could anyone have the power to destroy lives like this? How could they have targeted her and Jack? I don't know all the details, Jack admitted, his voice tinged with regret. But I've seen enough to know that we were just pawns in a much larger game. And I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I should have protected you. Sarah felt like she was suffocating. The idea that her life, her marriage, had been manipulated by unseen forces was too much to process. She had always believed that her choices had been her own. But now, everything felt tainted, as if her entire reality had been controlled by people she had never even met. She took a step back, her hands shaking. So what now, Jack? What do we do? How do we fight this? Jack's face softened with guilt, his eyes filled with regret. I don't have all the answers, Sarah. I wish I did. But what I do know is that we can't fight this alone. We need to find out who's behind all of this, and we need to make them stop. Sarah felt a wave of uncertainty crash over her. She didn't know who to trust anymore. Her mother, Jack, even her own instincts, all of them had led her down a path of betrayal. How could she move forward when everything she thought she knew was falling apart? And how do we even begin to uncover this, Jack? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack hesitated, then spoke, his voice firm. We start by finding the people who are pulling the strings. We have to figure out who they are, what they want, and why they've targeted us. Once we have that information, we can take the next step. Sarah nodded slowly, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what lay ahead, but one thing was clear, she couldn't keep running from the truth. She had to face it, no matter how terrifying it was. All right, she said, her voice steadying. Let's find out who's behind this. As Jack looked at her, he seemed to see a new resolve in her eyes. It was as though, in that moment, she had made a decision to fight, to take back control of her life. But even as she said the words, a part of her still felt uncertain. The road ahead was long, and the truth was something she wasn't sure she was prepared to face. But one thing was for sure, Sarah wasn't going to let the shadows of her past define her future. The next few days were a blur for Sarah. She and Jack had started their search for the people behind the chaos of her life, but each step forward only seemed to uncover more questions. The deeper they dug, the more complicated things became. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that somehow, someone always knew exactly where they were. It wasn't just paranoia, there were subtle signs, strange coincidences that made her uneasy. She began to notice cars parked outside her apartment, not moving for hours. She heard faint whispers on the phone, and sometimes when she would check her email, there would be strange, cryptic messages from anonymous accounts. The feeling of being trapped, of having no control over her own life, was overwhelming. But despite the fear creeping in, she couldn't stop. She couldn't turn back. She had to find out who was behind all this, who had pulled the strings that had led her to this point. One afternoon, as she was walking through the city, Jack called her. His voice sounded strained, as though he were holding something back. Sarah, we need to meet. I think I found something, he said, urgency in his tone. Where? She asked, her heart racing. Meet me at the usual place, Jack replied, and the line went dead before she could respond. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach as she made her way to the cafe where they had first met. It was becoming clear that the closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. When Sarah arrived, she found Jack sitting at their usual table, his hands clenched into fists on the table in front of him. He looked up as she approached, his face pale. What's going on? Sarah asked, sitting down across from him. Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, he slid a folder across the table. She opened it slowly, and inside, she found a series of documents, notes, financial records, and photos of people she didn't recognize. These are the people who have been pulling the strings, Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know who they were at first, but now I've figured it out. Sarah's eyes scanned the papers in front of her. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of it all. These names, they're all connected to the company your father worked for, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Jack said, nodding. And they've been watching us for years. They knew about our marriage, about your mother's influence, and they used all of that to get what they wanted. The realization hit Sarah like a wave. Her mother had been involved, but it wasn't just her. There were others, people with power, manipulating the situation from the shadows. The game they had all been playing was much bigger than Sarah had ever imagined. Why? What do they want? She asked, her voice shaking with emotion. Jack's expression hardened. They want control. They want to control the company, and they'll do whatever it takes to get it. They used us as pawns in their game, Sarah. Sarah felt a surge of anger. She had spent so much time blaming herself, blaming Jack, blaming her mother. But this was beyond anything she could have ever imagined. What do we do now? She asked, her voice cold with determination. Jack looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. Now we expose them. We take the information we have and we make sure the world knows what they've done. We can't let them get away with it. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of what they were about to do. Sarah felt a spark of hope, but it was overshadowed by the fear of what might happen if they failed. The road ahead was uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure, she wasn't going to let these people destroy her life any longer. Let's do it, she said, her voice steady. And with that, they made their plan. The first step would be to expose the people behind the shadows. Sarah didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of control. She wasn't just a victim in this game anymore. She was ready to fight back.